Caught you, I said, barely above a whisper. He froze, my son-in-law's hand halfway into my purse. Then, without shame, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You won't need it where you're headed." That line, it split something inside me. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I just watched him walk away with money I earned folding uniforms at the dry cleaners. But the next morning, he was at my front door, eyes swollen, lips trembling, begging. And not just for forgiveness. What changed overnight? Well, that's the part they never saw coming. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. It wasn't always like this. Some mornings the silence is so thick it hums. I wake up before the sun, out of habit, not necessity. No one's waiting for breakfast anymore. No packed lunches to make. No buses to catch. Still, I find myself making 2 cups of tea like I used to. One for me, and one for no one. By the time the clock chimes 7, the second cup is already cold. I live just outside Madison, in a little one-story house with peeling white paint and wind chimes that only move when the wind is kind. This house was once filled with laughter, birthday balloons taped to cabinets, sticky fingers on countertops, dance recitals performed in the living room. I was proud of how much love fit in a place this small. Now the loudest thing in here is the refrigerator clicking on. My daughter Rachel moved out over a decade ago. First to college, then straight into the arms of a man named Kyle. She swore he was charming, responsible, patient. I believed her. Of course I did. When your daughter looks at a man like he hung the moon, you hold your doubts quietly. She used to visit every Sunday. She'd bring banana bread or takeout from the Thai place I liked. We'd sit in the backyard under that old maple tree and talk about nothing and everything. But after the wedding, those Sundays dried up. First once a month. Then holidays only. Then just texts. Now she sends emojis instead of words. My last birthday was 3 months ago. I made a chocolate cake from scratch like I used to when she was little. I even lit candles. But no one came. She said Kyle had work emergencies, and she couldn't leave him alone with it. Funny. His emergencies never seemed to involve actual work. I stared at that cake for 2 days before I threw it out. I didn't cry though. Not for that. I've learned to hold pain like a paper crane. Delicate, folded tight, tucked away. But the real ache started a few weeks later. That was when I noticed the little things. First, a $20 bill missing from my wallet. Then a jar of quarters I kept near the washing machine gone. Rachel had been by to pick up mail. Kyle stayed in the car, she said. Then it happened again. 5 here. 10 there. My purse would be unzipped even though I always close it. First I thought I was slipping. Maybe age was playing tricks on me. I began writing down what cash I had every night on a sticky note. Then came the grocery delivery. I'd ordered online like usual. When the driver came, he asked me to pay $30 in cash for the extra tip Rachel had supposedly promised. I never told her to do that. Kyle had accepted the bags. I'd seen him through the window. When I stepped outside to hand over the tip, the driver looked confused. Oh, he already gave me the $30 when I arrived. I stood there with the cash in my hand, stunned. Who? I asked. The tall guy. Said he was your son. He's not. Kyle has never called me mom. He barely even says hello. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my wallet like it might whisper the truth. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. The man my daughter chose, the one she'd moved mountains for, was taking from me. Stealing. And worse? She knew. Or maybe she didn't want to know. Which hurts even more. One evening I invited them over for dinner. I made pot roast with carrots, Rachel's favorite. Kyle showed up 15 minutes late. No apology. He sat on his phone through the meal and didn't say a word unless it was to complain about the tough meat. Rachel kept defending him. He's tired, Mom. He's under a lot of pressure. I nodded. I even smiled. Because that's what you do when your child is blind to your pain. But what she didn't see, what she refused to see, was that I was tired too. Tired of being invisible in my own home. Tired of pretending I didn't notice the missing money, the dismissive tone, the rolled eyes. Tired of being treated like a burden instead of a blessing. One afternoon while I was folding laundry, I found my purse open again. Kyle had been by earlier to fix the internet. My wallet was off-center. A $1 bill was left inside, just one. As if he was mocking me. That's when I started to feel it. Not anger. Not even sadness. Resolve. A quiet, growing seed of something strong, something old. The part of me that once worked 3 jobs and still came home to read bedtime stories. The part of me that stitched her Halloween costumes by hand, even when my fingers were raw from work. I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing my patience. And just as I started to gather the truth, Kyle made the worst mistake of his life. He thought I was too old to notice, too weak to matter. But I saw him, with his hand inside my purse, and I heard what he said. You won't need it where you're headed. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to know what I gave up to raise the very girl who now watches me be robbed in silence. They say memory is soft like fog, like wool. But mine is sharp. Blade sharp. I remember the night Rachel was born as clearly as I remember what I had for dinner last night. Which, for the record, was leftover stew and silence. She came into this world during a snowstorm. January 12, 1988. The doctor almost didn't make it. But I did. I was 25, scared, and suddenly a mother. Her father held my hand and cried like a child himself. We didn't have much. A 1-bedroom apartment above a hardware store. The windows leaked in the winter, and the radiator banged like a ghost trapped in the walls. But we were happy. Or trying to be. Rachel never saw the hard parts. And I never let her. When she was 5, her father got sick. Stomach cancer. The kind that creeps in quiet and takes everything before you even know it's there. He died before she turned 6. After that it was just us. And God, I worked. Double shifts at the diner. Nights doing laundry for the motel down the road. Weekends cleaning houses in neighborhoods I could never afford to live in. My hands were always raw, my knees always sore. But Rachel always had what she needed. I remember one year, Christmas was coming and we were short. She wanted a dollhouse. Not a cheap one, the big one with working lights and tiny furniture. I couldn't afford it. So I built one. From scrap wood. I stayed up 3 nights in a row painting, gluing, sanding until my fingers bled. On Christmas morning she screamed when she saw it. She thought Santa had brought it. I never told her otherwise. There were dozens of moments like that. Like when her field trip to the State Museum cost $40. Money I didn't have. I pawned my wedding ring. Told her I'd lost it down the drain. She cried harder than I did. I promised I'd buy a new one someday. I never did. Or the time she needed braces. Insurance wouldn't cover it. I started selling homemade pies to church folks and standing outside the DMV every Saturday morning, offering shoe shines for $5. Took me 2 years, but I paid it all. And when she got into college, my God, I was proud. I drove her there in our beat-up Toyota. We didn't even have GPS. I printed out MapQuest directions the night before. I remember pulling up in front of the dorms and seeing her face, lit up like the sun. I cried the whole drive home. Not because I was sad, but because I'd done it. I gave her a life better than mine. And when she graduated with honors, Kyle was already in the picture. He was charming then. Clean haircut, firm handshake, even called me ma'am, for a while. But charm fades. It doesn't pay bills. It doesn't feed a family. And it certainly doesn't respect sacrifice. Kyle never asked me about Rachel's childhood. He never thanked me for what I gave her. He never once looked around this house, the same house I paid off with blood and bone, and said, "You built this." He just looked for what he could take. And maybe that's what breaks my heart the most. Not that he stole from me, but that she let him. Because Rachel knows what I've done. She knows I didn't date, didn't remarry, didn't take time for myself. Everything I was, every good thing left in me, I gave to her. And yet here I am decades later, watching her husband pluck bills from my purse like I'm already dead. Do you know what that does to a mother? To be erased? I used to be her entire world. Now I'm an old woman with shaky hands and a wallet she thinks won't miss a few 20s. But I notice. And it's not the money. It's the dismissal. The quiet disrespect. The way Kyle looks at me like I'm a relic. I remember one night when Rachel was about 10. I was up late doing laundry in the tub because the machine broke. She came out of bed and said, "Mama, why don't you rest?" I told her, "Because you're the reason I get up." That was the truth. But now I wonder, was I wrong to make her my everything? Did I teach her that love means giving endlessly, even to people who don't deserve it? Because lately she seems to believe I owe her. Like I'm a bank account she can withdraw from. Or worse, a burden she's stuck tolerating. I see it in her eyes when I ask her to stay for tea. I see it in how quickly she checks the time when she visits. I see it in the way she sighs when I bring up the past, like my life is just an old movie she's watched too many times. But I remember it all. Every bruise, every sacrifice, every smile I forced so she wouldn't worry. And that's why when I saw Kyle with his hand in my purse, something inside me didn't just break, snapped, because this wasn't about a few missing dollars. It was about a lifetime that had been slowly erased. And I was finally ready to do something about it. So I stopped pretending and I set a trap, because if they thought I was blind, they were about to learn just how clearly I still see. It started with a sticky note. I wrote down everything that was in my wallet, the exact amount of cash, which bills, even the way they were folded. I tucked the note into my nightstand drawer, behind an old bottle of lavender lotion I hadn't touched in years. The next day I placed my purse exactly where I always do, on the small bench beside the front door. Rachel had texted she'd be dropping by to pick up some mail. I knew Kyle would be with her. He always was, even when she said he wouldn't be. They arrived late afternoon. Rachel came in smiling, but it was tight, hurried. She hugged me quickly, barely brushing my shoulder. Kyle didn't come in right away, said he was making a call. I offered tea. Rachel declined, said they were just stopping for a second. While she gathered the envelopes I left on the counter, Kyle wandered in. He didn't even look at me, just drifted toward the living room like he belonged there. I pretended to wipe down the kitchen counter, heart pounding in my ears. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. After they left, I didn't rush. I waited a full hour before I checked my purse. The $50 bill was gone. Just one. The rest left untouched. But I knew, because I'd written down the serial number. I knew. He was still stealing. Boldly. Deliberately. Like I didn't matter. Like I was some old fool too tired or too forgetful to know the difference. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the lights off, staring at the empty chair across from me, the one that used to belong to my husband. I remembered his voice so clearly. Don't let people mistake your kindness for blindness, and I'd been kind for far too long. But I wasn't blind. Not anymore. The next morning I took my savings, all of it, and bought a small security camera. A discreet little thing no bigger than a bar of soap. I tucked it behind the bookshelf in the living room, angled directly at the front door and the bench beside it, right where my purse always sat. I left the house immaculate. I made sure everything had its place. No reason to suspect anything had changed. Then I waited. 2 days later Rachel came again. Alone this time, or so I thought. She said Kyle was at work, but when I glanced through the curtains, I saw his silhouette in the car, slouched in the passenger seat. She asked to use the bathroom before leaving. I said yes. While she was gone, the door creaked. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Later, when I watched the footage, I saw him. Kyle slipped inside like a shadow, moved directly to the bench, unzipped my purse, took out a 20 and folded it neatly into his jacket pocket. Then he looked around and smirked. Smirked. Like he was proud of himself. Like he'd won. I pressed pause on the video, heart thudding. There it was, proof. Not just of the theft, but of the smugness. The mockery. I saved the footage and backed it up to a USB drive. That night I made 2 more copies. One for my lawyer. One for the bank. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. Not directly. Let them keep thinking I was harmless. Let them feel safe. The next time they came by, I smiled. I served coffee. I listened to Rachel ramble about home renovations they couldn't afford. I nodded as Kyle complained about gas prices. Then I offered them cake. Chocolate. The same kind I made every year for Rachel's birthday. They both declined. I smiled wider, because I had seen enough. And they had no idea what was coming. A week later I laid the final trap. I left an envelope sticking out of my purse, marked property deed copies. Inside was nothing but blank paper, folded thick to mimic weight. I placed 3 crisp $100 bills behind it, just peeking out. Then I called Rachel. Told her I needed help setting up my online banking. She said she'd be by in the evening. When they arrived, Kyle barely acknowledged me. Rachel sat with me at the kitchen table, guiding me through the website while Kyle used the restroom. 15 minutes later, they left. I checked my purse immediately. The money was gone. Again. I didn't cry this time. I didn't feel shocked or violated. I felt steady. Because now I had what I needed. Proof. Undeniable. Unarguable. And the look on Kyle's face as he exited the house, smug and satisfied, would be the last time he ever felt superior to me. The next day I told Rachel everything. And what she said in response hurt me more than all the theft combined. I didn't waste time. The very next morning, I called Rachel and asked her to come alone. I need to talk, I said. It's important. She sighed into the phone. I could hear it clear as a slap. Is it something serious, Mom? Kyle and I have a lot going on right now. I ignored the sting. Just come by. Please. She showed up that afternoon wearing oversized sunglasses and a rushed attitude. She didn't even take off her coat. What's going on? I didn't sit down. I didn't offer tea. Instead, I walked over to the shelf, took the small USB drive from behind the clock, and handed it to her. What's this? Watch it, I said. She furrowed her brows, plugged it into her phone with an adapter. I stood by the window as the footage played, every second captured in perfect, damning detail. Kyle sneaking in. Kyle unzipping my purse. Kyle stealing. Rachel watched in silence. No gasps. No tears. Just stillness. When the clip ended, she locked her phone, placed it face down on the table, and said, "Why would you record him like that?" My stomach turned. What? I whispered. She looked up, eyes sharp now. You set him up, Mom. That's manipulative. I couldn't breathe. I set him up? Rachel, he was stealing from me. She crossed her arms. He said you offered him money. That you're getting confused lately. You've been forgetting things. Don't you dare, I said, voice shaking. Don't you start using that word. What word? Dementia. That word. That's the word they always use when they want to shut you up. When they want to make sure no one believes you. When they want control. Rachel shrugged. I'm just saying, maybe it's time we talk about assisted care. A nurse. Maybe moving somewhere with support. It hit me like a gust of wind in winter. They weren't just stealing from me. They were planning to remove me. I could barely hold the rage beneath my skin. My hands trembled, not from age but fury. I am not going anywhere, I said. And if you think for 1 second you can push me out of my own home. Rachel stood. Mom, you're being emotional. Kyle is my husband. I have to protect him. From the truth. I snapped. From consequences? He made a mistake. No, I said, louder now. A mistake is dropping a glass. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. What he did, what you're both doing, is deliberate. She looked at me then like I was something she pitied. Something broken and bitter. That look was worse than any slap. I think you need rest, she said, walking to the door. We'll talk later. Don't come back, I said quietly. She paused, hand on the knob. You don't mean that. I did. But I didn't say it again. She left, closing the door with the kind of finality you feel in your ribs. I stood in the hallway, in the house I built with my hands, the house I had paid off penny by penny while raising her, and I felt small, erased, like wallpaper peeling in an abandoned room. That evening I went to the grocery store. I needed milk and eggs, but mostly I needed to feel like a human again. I walked the aisles slowly, running my fingers along boxes of cereal and canned peaches like I was trying to remember what normal felt like. In the checkout line I saw Kyle. He was behind me, loud as always, laughing into his phone. I turned my head just enough to hear him. Yeah, the old bat's losing it. Probably doesn't even know where she puts her damn money. The cashier glanced at me, then at him. I paid in silence. As I walked out, I heard him say loudly, "Someone should take her keys before she drives into a mailbox." People laughed. I didn't. I got into my car, stared at the steering wheel and thought, this is it. This is how it ends, isn't it? Not with love. Not with gratitude. But with humiliation. A life of sacrifice reduced to a joke in the cereal aisle. What would you do if your own daughter laughed in your face like that? Would you still open your door? Or finally close it forever? That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off, listening to the creak of the floorboards and the hum of the refrigerator. I remembered the nights I stayed up sewing Rachel's costumes. The time I walked to work in a blizzard so she wouldn't miss breakfast. The years I went without new shoes so she could have the ones she liked. And I remembered the look on her face when she defended the man stealing from me. Something inside me hardened, not into hate, but into resolve. That night I made a decision, quiet, firm, final. And the next morning, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in 20 years. I hadn't opened that drawer since the day Rachel left for college. It was the bottom drawer of the old writing desk tucked into the corner of my bedroom, the one with the wobbly leg and the brass knob worn smooth from decades of use. It held pieces of a life I'd sealed away, not because I forgot but because I remembered too much. Inside were the things I had once clung to. A faded postcard from Niagara Falls. The receipt from our first family car. A rust-red Chevy with no air conditioning. And a blue envelope that hadn't seen light in over 20 years. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a letter. From my husband. He'd written it just a few weeks before the cancer took him. I hadn't read it in years, but somehow, I knew every word. And if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I need you to remember who you are. Not just Rachel's mother. Not just my wife. But you, the girl who stood in the snow with holes in her boots and refused to complain. The woman who never let the world harden her. No matter how hard it tried. Don't let anyone take your light, and don't let them make you small. Not even in your old age. Not ever. My hands trembled as I folded it back. And then I cried. Not like before. Not soft and quiet and polite. But hard. The kind of crying that feels like it's been waiting decades to be heard. Because I'd reached my limit. It wasn't just Kyle. It wasn't even just Rachel. It was the way the world had started looking through me, around me, like I was invisible. Like I'd already died, and they were just tolerating the ghost I left behind. I used to be someone. I used to matter. And I was done begging for a seat at the table I built with my bare hands. So the next morning I got to work. First I changed every lock in the house. Front door. Back door. Garage. Even the shed. Then I called my lawyer, Mr. Henley. A kind man with a deep voice and a habit of tapping his pen when he was thinking. I need to update my will, I said. He asked why. I didn't answer. I just said, let's meet Monday. Next, I closed the shared savings account Rachel had access to. The one we'd opened years ago when she went to college, just in case she needed help. I transferred everything to a private account with 2 beneficiaries. A local women's shelter and a scholarship fund for first-generation college girls. Not 1 cent would go to Rachel. Not 1 cent would touch Kyle's greedy hands. That evening, I stood by the living room window as the rain began to fall. It started light, just a whisper on the roof, but soon it was a downpour. The kind that sounds like 1,000 hands tapping on the glass. I made myself a cup of tea. Hot. Strong. Sat in my favorite chair, the one with the worn floral print, and listened. Let the storm wash through me. I thought about all the storms I'd already survived. The death of a husband. The loneliness of single motherhood. The cold dinners eaten after Rachel was fed. The years of silence from a daughter I had given everything to. And I realized something. I wasn't broken. I was weathered. Like the house I still lived in. The house that had creaked and groaned through every Wisconsin winter. But never collapsed. They thought I was frail. They mistook quiet for weak. But I was done playing small. Done playing safe. The next morning I found the small photo frame on my nightstand. The one that had cracked years ago when I dropped it during a move. It held a photo of Rachel at age 7, sitting on my shoulders, both of us smiling with snow in our hair. The glass was still broken. I stared at it for a long time. Then I took it out, gently removed the photo, and slid it into a new frame, one that had been empty since my husband died. Because from now on I would only frame what was whole. That night I slept with the window open, letting the sound of the rain lull me to sleep like a lullaby from a past life. And in that sleep I dreamed of the woman I used to be. The one Kyle and Rachel thought had vanished. But she was still here. And she was finally ready to rise. I wore navy blue to the lawyer's office. Not because I wanted to look important, but because it was the last thing my husband ever saw me wear before they wheeled him away from our home for the final time. He used to say, "You look sharp in navy, Anne. Like you mean business." That day I did. Mr. Henley stood as I entered. He hadn't seen me in years. Not since I updated Rachel's name on the house title after her father died. Back then I'd called it a just-in-case measure. Back then I trusted her. Now I sat across from him with a folder in my lap, and no tremble in my hands. "I want to make some changes," I said. "Effective immediately." He nodded slowly. "You want to take Rachel off as your primary beneficiary?" I met his eyes. "I want her name gone from everything." He didn't ask why. That's why I chose him. He simply pulled out the necessary forms and began writing. As he worked, my mind wandered not back to last week, not even last year, but decades earlier. To the woman I used to be. The one who wore holes in her shoes walking 5 miles to her second job. The one who stood in front of PTA boards defending her daughter's right to be in honors classes. The one who filed her own taxes by hand and read every contract twice before signing. I had been strong, capable, unbreakable. And slowly, over the years, that woman had been chipped away. By exhaustion, by grief, by the thankless job of motherhood that never really ends. But not anymore. That part of me, the woman my husband fell in love with, she was back now. Wiser. Quieter. Sharper. While Mr. Henley typed, I pulled out a second folder. It held a letter handwritten, sealed. "This needs to be delivered to Rachel," I said. "But not by me." He looked at the envelope, then back at me. "You sure?" "Absolutely." He placed it gently into his briefcase. We spent the next 2 hours transferring titles, updating beneficiaries, and securing legal protections over my property. I named the women's shelter as my sole heir. Not because I wanted to spite Rachel, but because I wanted to honor the kind of mother I had been. The kind who fights. The kind who gives without expecting. The kind who knows when it's time to stop. As I signed the final page, Mr. Henley said, "You know, most people your age wait too long. Until it's too late." I looked him dead in the eye. I almost did. That night I sat at my kitchen table and opened an old wooden box I hadn't touched since Rachel's wedding. Inside were keepsakes. A lace handkerchief from my own wedding day, the hospital bracelet from Rachel's birth, and a small square diary with frayed corners. The first page read, "To my daughter, may you always know how much I gave to see you smile." I flipped through the pages slowly, reliving pieces of a life built around her. The first time she said, "Mama." The night she had a fever and I sat by her bed reciting prayers until sunrise. The time she broke her arm falling off the swing and clung to me like I was her entire world. Each page bled with sacrifice. But also love. Real love. Not the kind that expects payback. But the kind that now had reached its end. On the last page I scribbled one final line. "I will always be your mother. But I will no longer be your fool." I closed the book, placed it back in the box, and locked it. The next morning, I went to the bank and withdrew half my savings in cash. Not for Rachel. Not for Kyle. But for the shelter I planned to visit that weekend, the same one I had volunteered at in my younger days. I wanted those women to have beds. Warmth. A little dignity. Because that's what I had almost lost. That's what Kyle tried to take. And what Rachel in her silence helped him erase. But no more. They thought I was just an old woman clinging to memories. What they didn't know was that those memories were bricks. Heavy, yes, but strong. The very foundation of who I was. And I was rebuilding. One decision at a time. And just when I thought I had taken back everything they stole, Kyle crossed a line I never thought even he would dare to cross. The final straw didn't come with fanfare. It came quietly, like rot beneath a floorboard, unnoticed until the weight of it breaks everything. It was a Tuesday. Gray skies, soft drizzle. I was trimming the dead branches off the rose bushes in the front yard, when the mailman walked up with a tight smile. "Big envelope for you today, Miss Anne," he said, handing over a thick white packet. I thanked him, wiped my dirt-stained hands on my apron and stepped inside. The envelope had my name, address, and a return label from a company I didn't recognize. I opened it. Inside were documents from a private elder care agency. Brochures. Pricing sheets. Application forms, half filled out in Rachel's handwriting. And at the bottom? A post-it note, bright pink with Kyle's sharp, slanted scribble. Let us know when you're ready to make the move. This place is too much for you. No love, Rachel. No, we're here for you. Just that note. That was their plan. Not just to steal from me, not just to gaslight me. They wanted to move me out of my home. My garden. My kitchen. My memories. All of it, wiped away like dust on a windowsill. Kyle didn't even have the decency to ask. And Rachel, my daughter, had already started the paperwork. I sat in the living room for over an hour, the envelope open on the coffee table, my tea gone cold beside it, and something inside me turned. Not sadness. Not even rage. Steel. If they thought I would go quietly, they didn't know me at all. That night I took out my diary. Not the one meant for Rachel, but my private one. The one I hadn't written in since my husband died. I opened to a blank page and wrote 2 words at the top. The plan. I didn't want revenge that screamed. I wanted silence. A silence that spoke louder than any courtroom or family feud. I wanted consequences, not chaos. The next morning I called Mr. Henley again. I want to finalize everything, I said. No delays. Then, I visited the local hardware store and bought a small safe. I bolted it inside my bedroom closet and placed inside it my new banking documents, the updated will, the USB with video evidence, a signed letter revoking all access rights Rachel ever had to anything with my name on it. And then, I smiled. Because for the first time in years I wasn't reacting. I was leading. That week I changed the Wi-Fi password, removed Kyle's name from the alarm system guest list, and called the police to report a pattern of minor thefts from my home, backed with surveillance footage. The officer, a kind woman named Sergeant Lane, took it seriously. We can't arrest him on this alone, she said, but we can flag it. He won't know until he tries something again. Good. Let him try. I left small decoy wallets out, filled with expired gift cards and toy money from a board game, a test, and 2 days later one of them was missing. Not a word from Rachel. Not an apology. Not even a call. They didn't know I was watching every move. Because that's the thing about people like Kyle, they never think the quiet ones are dangerous. He thought I was weak. He thought I was soft. But I've been both mother and father, provider and protector. I've buried a husband, survived foreclosure threats, and fought to keep food on the table when I barely had breath in my lungs. You don't live a life like mine and come out soft. You come out unshakable. That Friday, I drove to the women's shelter I'd listed in my will. I brought 3 boxes, household items, towels, new books, and all the jewelry I used to wear when I was young and full of dreams. I walked into their office and said, "This is yours now. More is coming." They asked me if I wanted a receipt. I said no, because this wasn't a donation. It was a declaration. I was giving to the women who knew what it felt like to be dismissed, overlooked, taken from. Women like me. When I returned home that evening, the sky had cleared. Golden light poured over the porch. And as I stood there, keys in one hand, rose petals clinging to my sweater, I heard something that almost made me laugh. A voice. Kyle's voice. On the other side of the hedge, whispering into the phone. She's losing it. Won't even notice what's coming next. Once the papers go through, the house is ours. Ours. Not hers. Not even Rachel's. Ours. He was planning to take it all. To put me in a care home, paint over the walls I bled for, and maybe flip the property for profit. But he'd made one mistake. He thought I hadn't already flipped the script. So when I invited them over one last time, I smiled. I served tea. And I handed Kyle an envelope that made the color drain from his face. I set the table for 3. Real china. The good teacups. Lace table runner. The one Rachel used to beg me not to use, because it looked too old-fashioned. I steeped the Earl Grey for exactly 4 minutes, then poured it into the porcelain cups. The scent of bergamot filled the room. Sweet. Calm. Measured. Just like I wanted to appear. They arrived at 4:12 p.m. Rachel walked in first, smiling as if everything were normal. Kyle followed behind her, already looking bored. I greeted them with warmth. Invited them to sit. "Something smells good," Rachel said, pulling out a chair. I didn't respond. Just nodded. Kyle didn't bother with pleasantries. He sipped his tea, then looked at me and said, So what's this about? Rachel said it was important. I slid the envelope across the table. Cream-colored. Sealed. Big. He picked it up, glanced at Rachel, and then opened it without ceremony. The silence that followed was deafening. Inside were 3 things. A copy of my updated will, completely removing Rachel as beneficiary. A cease and desist letter from my lawyer regarding any future access to my finances or property. A still image from the surveillance footage, Kyle's hand in my purse. Kyle's jaw locked. Rachel's face went pale. You recorded me, he hissed. I protected myself, I said calmly. Rachel grabbed the papers. Her hands trembled. Mom, this is insane. You can't do this. I already did. You're disinheriting your only child? After everything. I raised an eyebrow. After everything? Rachel, you helped a man steal from me. You tried to move me out of my home. You lied to my face. She stood, knocking her chair back. This is manipulation. Kyle stood too, crumpling the envelope in his fist. You're bluffing. I tilted my head. Try me. He laughed, sharp and bitter. You're old. Alone. You won't last long in this house. You'll come crawling back. I stood up, walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up a second envelope, dropped it in front of him. What's this? He asked, already annoyed. Your termination. He looked confused. From what? The home, I said. The one you assumed would be yours. The accounts you assumed I'd forget to check. The life you thought I was too tired to protect. Rachel's voice cracked. Mom, please. No, I said. I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to. I let too many things slide. I forgave too many things quietly. But I will not be robbed of my dignity. Rachel sat back down, stunned into silence. Kyle looked at her and said, Say something. She didn't, because for the first time maybe she finally saw it. Me. Not the frail old woman with forgetful eyes, but the mother who walked to work in snowstorms, who built dollhouses by hand, who sacrificed everything and asked for nothing. And now I was done. Would you forgive or walk away forever? If your own child stood beside the man who stole from you, would there be anything left to save? The rest of the conversation, if you could call it that, lasted under 10 minutes. Kyle tried threats, tried guilt, tried to twist the narrative. Rachel's eyes flickered between us, her mouth moving but no words coming out. When they realized I wasn't bending, they left. No hugs. No apologies. Kyle slammed the door. I didn't flinch. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea, still warm in the pot, and sat at the table, the one they assumed they'd inherit. Outside, the wind picked up. The wind chimes on the porch danced like they used to when Rachel was small. And inside, for the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. But peace, it turns out, doesn't last long. Not when people like Kyle realize they've lost control. Because the very next day he came back. And this time it wasn't just words. The next morning I found boot prints on my porch. Heavy, muddy. Tracked in from the rain that had fallen the night before. I hadn't heard a knock. No doorbell. Just those prints pacing, circling. Like someone couldn't decide whether to knock or kick the door in. I knew they were Kyle's. He was the only one with size 12 arrogance. I didn't bother calling the police. Not yet. Instead, I made my tea, toasted a slice of bread, ate it slowly, deliberately, while staring at the locked front door. They always think they can rattle you. But silence is a weapon too. By noon, I got a call from Mr. Henley. He came by, he said. Unannounced. Angry. Demanded access to your documents. I had to escort him out. I closed my eyes. Thank you. An hour later, the neighbors called. And is everything all right? That man, your son-in-law. He was banging on your door this morning screaming. We almost called the cops. They paused. Then whispered. He said you weren't of sound mind. That you were endangering yourself. Is that true? I laughed. Loud and long. I'm the most sound I've ever been, I told her. But inside I felt the chill. The next phase had begun. Kyle wasn't just angry now. He was desperate. And desperate men are dangerous. Not with fists but with lies. By evening, I got a voicemail from Rachel. Her voice shaky, unsure. Mom. Kyle says you're telling people lies about him. He says you forged those documents. That you're confused. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The papers were real. The bank confirmed the transfers. The will was notarized. The footage was secure. But the silence, that was the loudest move I made. The next day Kyle returned. Not alone this time. He brought an officer. I opened the door without hesitation. "Good afternoon," the young man said, awkward in his stance. "We got a call about a potential wellness concern. May we come in?" I looked him dead in the eyes. "Do you have a warrant?" He blinked. "No, ma'am." "Then you may not." Kyle stood on the porch, arms crossed, smirking. "She's unstable. She's hiding things." I reached behind the door and handed the officer a folder. Inside were copies of the will, proof of sound mental evaluations I'd scheduled weeks prior, video footage, legal documentation. The officer skimmed it, jaw tightening. Kyle stepped forward. "She's lying." The officer turned to him. "Sir, unless you have legal authority or proof of endangerment, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Kyle's face turned red. "She's cutting us out. She's crazy." The officer didn't flinch. "Then take it to court." He stepped between us and slowly escorted Kyle off the porch. Rachel never showed her face. Just like before. That night the neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. But I felt no fear. I boiled a fresh pot of tea and sat on the porch in my robe, watching the night drift in. The moonlight danced over the rose bushes, their petals glistening with dew. Across the street, porch lights flicked off one by one. And me? I stayed lit. Because they thought they could turn my own life into a prison. But I'd made it into a fortress. Motif return. The tea sat warm in my hands, not cold and forgotten like before. This time I didn't drink it out of habit. I drank it in peace. A few days later a letter arrived. Handwritten. From Rachel. No apology. Just confusion. "Why are you doing this?" Not "what did we do wrong?" Not "how can I fix this?" Just that. "Why are you doing this?" I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer beside the letter from my husband. One from the man who built my world. One from the daughter who helped tear it down. And I realized, Rachel was finally starting to understand. She couldn't manipulate me. Not anymore. But the deepest ache wasn't anger. It was what I found later that week, hidden inside an old shoebox, buried behind coats in the attic. A truth I'd forgotten. And a choice I'd have to make. I hadn't been in the attic for years. The pull-down ladder groaned under my weight as I climbed, each rung creaking like an old memory being disturbed. The air was thick with dust and forgotten seasons. I brought up a small flashlight, not trusting the single bulb overhead that flickered more often than it glowed. I wasn't looking for anything, just trying to clean. But what I found stopped me cold. A shoebox. Worn soft with time. Wrapped once in Christmas paper, now yellowed and brittle at the edges. It was buried behind a pile of old coats, tucked so far back I had to crawl to reach it. My heart knew before my hands did. I opened the lid slowly. Inside were pieces of a life Rachel had long forgotten, and I had tried to. A tiny pair of baby shoes. A drawing she made at age 4, stick figures labeled me and Mommy in purple crayon. And at the very bottom a folded letter. Not from me. From her. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Rachel's slanted cursive, full of loops and hearts over every I. It was dated from when she was 13, just after her first major school play, the one where she played a tree, and I clapped louder than anyone else in the auditorium. I unfolded it. "Dear Mom, I know we don't have much. I know you work a lot and come home tired, but I want you to know I see it. I see everything. And I love you more than I say. One day when I'm grown I'll take care of you. Promise. I'll buy you a big house with a porch and a garden. Love, your little girl forever." My throat closed. Tears rolled down my cheeks without permission. She meant it. Once. Before the noise of the world, before Kyle, before the bills and the lies and the cold silences at dinner, there was love. Real, small, innocent love. And now? Now that promise had become dust in a shoebox. I sat in the attic for a long time, holding that letter, trying to figure out when everything had shifted. Was it college? Was it when I helped with her down payment and never asked for it back? Was it the first time she watched Kyle mock me and said nothing? Or was it me? Did I raise her to think love was something to be earned through sacrifice? Did I teach her that giving without limits was the same as being loved? I thought about all the times I'd told her, "Don't worry about me." All the times I'd smiled through pain. All the times I'd made excuses for her, for Kyle, for everyone but myself. And in that attic, I finally faced it. I wasn't just betrayed. I helped build the road they walked over me on. But that road ended here. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to leave her something. Not money. Not the house. But a lesson. Something more valuable than any inheritance. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote Rachel a new letter. Not like the first one, cold, legal, distant. This one was honest. Final. Not bitter but clear. I told her about the shoebox. The letter. The shoes. The promises. I told her I forgave the girl she used to be. But not the woman she became. I wrote, "This house is not yours. This life is not yours. But the love I had for you was always yours. Until you traded it for silence." I sealed the letter and placed it beside the teacup Kyle once drank from. The one he never finished. Let it sit there. Unanswered. Undrinkable. Motif returned. A cold cup of tea. Forgotten. Left behind. Just like me. Later that week, I visited the shelter one final time before the funds were officially transferred. I walked through the halls, simple, clean, filled with women who reminded me of every version of myself. I met a young girl named Kira, 17, scared, pregnant, alone. She reminded me of Rachel at that age. Eyes too wide, voice too soft. We sat in the common room while she told me about her mother, how she left, how she never said goodbye. "I used to dream she'd come back," Kira whispered. "But now I just dream of a place where I'm safe." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You'll build that place," I said. "And when you do, don't let anyone tell you it's not yours." She smiled. And in her smile I found what Rachel no longer gave me. Gratitude. So I gave Kira something, not just a donation but a promise. And when I returned home, Kyle's car was waiting in my driveway. But he wasn't there to steal. He was there to beg. Kyle's car was parked crooked in my driveway, one wheel on the lawn, headlights still on though the afternoon sun was high and unforgiving. He was slumped against the driver's side door when I pulled in behind him. I didn't get out right away. I just sat there, watching, trying to see the man my daughter once loved, the man I once tried to welcome into my family. But all I saw now was a boy in a man's suit, unshaven and unraveling. He stood when I stepped out of my car. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked thinner, as if the lies had been feeding on him instead of the other way around. "Mrs. Turner," he said quietly. That was new. He used to call me hey or nothing at all. I didn't answer. He glanced toward the house, then back at me. "I need your help." I raised an eyebrow. "Help?" He swallowed. "I lost my job." I nodded once. "I heard. Rachel, she left me. That one hit differently. But I didn't show it. She said I ruined everything," he added, like a child tattling after being caught red-handed. I stayed silent. Then came the punchline. "I just need a place to stay. Just for a bit. Until I get on my feet." I looked him in the eyes, really looked. And for the first time I didn't see a villain. I saw a parasite, clinging, sucking, surviving. But not living. Not learning. Not loving. "I'm sorry, Kyle," I said, voice steady. "There's nothing here for you." He blinked. "But this was supposed to be our house." "No," I said. "It was supposed to be my daughter's inheritance. But you both burned that to the ground." He stepped forward, desperation leaking from every pore. "I made mistakes, okay? I panicked. I was broke. I thought you wouldn't notice. And you thought I wouldn't matter," I interrupted. His face froze. "That's what this was about, wasn't it?" I said. "You thought I was too old, too soft. You thought I'd go quietly." He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. "You wanted to take my house, my dignity, and turn me into a whisper. But I'm still here. And you." I nodded toward his car. "You're the one with nowhere to go." He looked down. No more defiance. Just defeat. I walked past him up the porch steps and paused at the door. "You know," I said without turning around, You asked me once why I made tea every morning even when no one came to drink it. He didn't respond. It wasn't for habit. It wasn't for hope. It was for memory. Because I once had a family that sat at this table. And I needed to remember what love felt like, before people like you cheapened it. Then I opened the door, stepped inside, and shut it behind me. Locked it. Listen. He stood there for a while. I could hear his steps on the gravel, pacing, pausing, pacing again. Then nothing. Just wind. Just quiet. Just peace. That evening, I pulled out the envelope Rachel had sent. The letter asking, "Why are you doing this?" I finally wrote back. Not to answer her question, but to close the door gently. "I'm doing this because I loved you too much to let you keep hurting me. You let a man teach you how to value money over motherhood. I hope one day you remember who you were before him. Until then, I release you." I didn't sign it, Mom. I signed it then. Because Rachel, as she was, no longer knew her mother. And I had to stop pretending I still knew my daughter. The next morning, I drove to the shelter again. This time, I brought a trunk full of books. Cookbooks, novels, children's stories. Stories mattered. They had saved me once during long nights and harder years. Maybe they could do the same here. Kira was in the garden, kneeling in dirt with her round belly brushing against her thighs. She smiled when she saw me. "Miss Anne," she said. "I didn't think you'd come back so soon." I handed her a small wrapped box. She opened it carefully. Inside was a tiny pair of baby shoes, the ones I'd found in the attic. "Rachel's. They were my daughter's," I said. "Now they're yours." She covered her mouth, eyes glassy. "I can't take this." "You already have," I whispered. "Because real family we give without taking." She stood and hugged me, tighter than Rachel had in years. That hug didn't ask anything of me. It gave. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Chosen. I thought that would be the last chapter. Until Rachel showed up unannounced. Eyes hollow, lips trembling, holding something in her hands I never expected to see again. She came on a Thursday. No text. No call. Just the sound of slow steps on my porch, and then a soft knock. Not urgent, not forceful. Just tired. When I opened the door, Rachel stood there with her coat unzipped, her eyes rimmed red. No makeup. No pretense. And in her hands, she held the shoebox. The same one I'd left on her doorstep a few days earlier. The one with her childhood shoes, the purple crayon drawing, and both of our letters folded on top. I said nothing. She didn't step forward. "I read everything," she said. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming into silence. I nodded. "And I don't know who I am anymore. That made two of us." She looked down at the box, her fingers trembling. When I saw what you kept, I remembered that girl. The one who wrote that letter. The one who thought she'd buy you a house and a garden." Her voice cracked. I don't know when I stopped being her. A long silence stretched between us. Then I opened the door wider. Not all the way, but enough. "Come in." We sat at the kitchen table, her on the edge of her chair, me in the one with the cushion that always sank too low. She looked around like she was seeing the house for the first time. "It's smaller than I remembered." "No," I said. "You just got too big for it." She flinched, but she didn't argue. "I lost everything," she whispered. "Kyle's gone. He took what little we had left. Emptied the account. Vanished." I stirred my tea slowly. "And now you're here." She nodded, then pulled something else from her coat pocket. A ring. Not hers. Mine. The wedding ring I'd once pawned to pay for her school trip. "I found it in a box at his place," she said. "He never sold it. Just kept it hidden like a trophy." I took it gently, turned it over in my palm. It still fit. I looked at her, really looked. And for the first time in a long while, I saw the girl who once danced barefoot in this kitchen, asking me to twirl with her while cookies burned in the oven. "Why did you come back, Rachel?" She hesitated. "Because I don't want to be like him. I don't want to live in silence. And because I miss my mom." Tears welled up again, but not mine this time. She broke. Right there at the table, she sobbed into her hands. And I let her. Because sometimes people don't need answers. They need space to collapse. When she looked up again, her voice was a whisper. "Is there anything left of us?" I looked down at my tea. It had gone cold again. Motif return. Cold. Untouched. Waiting for warmth. And still I said, maybe. But not if you're here for the house. Or the money. Or pity. I'm not, she said quickly. I swear. I don't want anything. I met her eyes. Then what do you want? She paused. Thought. Forgiveness. And maybe a second chance. Tell me. Is respect more valuable than being loved? Would you open your door again? Or keep it locked forever? I didn't answer her right away. Because forgiveness doesn't bloom overnight. It takes roots. Takes work. But I told her this. You don't get to be my daughter just because you remember me now. You have to become her again. Day by day. She nodded. I will. And I believed her, or maybe I just wanted to. That night I didn't cry. I didn't hope. I simply placed the ring back into the small drawer by my bedside and turned off the light. No promises. No declarations. Just the faint sound of wind through the trees and the tea left unfinished on the counter. But in the middle of the night, I found myself opening my eyes. And listening. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't alone. The next morning I stood by the window with my warm cup of tea, and watched as Rachel tended the roses. And I realized some things don't bloom until they've been cut back. The sun rose gently over the garden, spilling gold across the porch steps and catching in the dew on the roses, the ones I had trimmed back so ruthlessly just weeks ago. And there she was, Rachel, in my gardening gloves, on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds, clipping stems, silent. She didn't ask to stay that morning. She just showed up, early, with her hair pulled back, wearing an old hoodie that once belonged to her father. No pretense. No theatrics. She didn't try to reclaim the room that used to be hers. She asked for the guest room, the smallest one, the one I had filled with forgotten books and mismatched quilts. And when I said nothing, just nodded, she quietly unpacked 2 small bags. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then she hadn't asked about the will. Hadn't brought up Kyle. Hadn't touched the bank. She just existed. Softly. Like a daughter learning how to walk again in the house that built her. One morning I found a note on the counter beside my teacup. Not long. Just a few lines. I'm applying for a position at the women's shelter. Kira said they need help. If they'll let me sweep floors, I'll sweep them. Love, Rachel. And I smiled. Because this time she didn't ask me to fix anything. She just asked to try. We found a rhythm. She made breakfast, always something simple like eggs or oatmeal. I still made tea. She started asking questions about my days, about Dad, about things she'd ignored for years. Sometimes we sat on the porch together and said nothing at all. Just listened to the wind in the chimes, the creak of the old swing, the rustle of squirrels on the roof. Other times I'd catch her standing in the hallway, staring at old photos. And once I found her quietly replacing the cracked photo frame I had tucked away. The one with her on my shoulders. The one I thought I could never look at again. Now it sits on the mantel whole. Not because we erased what happened, but because we're learning how to carry it together. A few days ago, she came into the kitchen with a book of recipes from her teenage years. Do you remember the cinnamon bread you used to make? She asked. I did. She tried to bake it herself that night. Burned the first batch. Underbaked the second. But the third tasted like 1999 again. Like late nights and laughter and sticky fingers. We ate it with butter and warm tea. And we didn't talk about the past. We just let the flavor do the talking. Yesterday Kira stopped by. Not as a shelter resident but as a friend. She brought the baby. A little girl named Hope. I held her in my arms, her tiny fingers curling around mine. Rachel stood beside me, looking at her the way I used to look at Rachel. With awe. With love. And with fear, the good kind. The kind that says, please let me be better. Today I wrote the final entry in my diary. Not out of grief, but gratitude. I wrote, my daughter was lost. But I found her in the soil. In the silence. In the apology that came without words. And in the tea she now makes for me, every morning. Hot. Steaming. Never forgotten. Motif closure. The tea is finally warm again. I placed the diary back in its drawer. Locked it. Not to hide it but to preserve it. Because this chapter is done. Outside Rachel calls for me. She's trimming the roses. She asks if we should plant something new this fall. Maybe tulips. Maybe lavender. Maybe something that blooms slowly the way forgiveness does. I tell her, whatever we plant, make sure it's deep. Strong roots. That's the only way it survives the storms. She nods. She understands now. I sit on the porch with my tea warm in my hands and look out at the home I built. Not the wood. Not the roof. But the life inside it. Marjorie's house, they used to call it. The one where the woman lived alone. The one people whispered about. But now they see the lights on again. They see the flowers blooming. They hear the sound of laughter, quiet, unsure but growing. And maybe they wonder. Maybe they realize. Marjorie's house lives again.